Good afternoon, everyone. I am Reverend Ramel McCall, Urban Missioner for the Diocese of Maryland and Rector of Church of the Holy Trinity, along with my other co-convener, Dr. Alicia Tatum of Islamic Christian and Jewish Studies. And we're here to obviously convene our next segment, which, as you heard in the song, which is Peace in the Valley. There is peace in the valley. So first of all, we thank you all so much for joining us during this particular day. We've actually got two things going on today. So this is actually the first particular event of this particular segment. And so we want to explain a little bit of why we're here today, particularly talking about PS 103, which is a very important school that is still there in our particular area of Baltimore City. Our history has been filled with hard times and unspeakable tragedies over and over again. But the faith community has always issued the call for peace in the valley within the ecumenical and interfaith context of the divine. When there were troubles in the 60s, coalitions like ours organized to fight for equal rights and to bring peace. At this moment in history, we see a resurgence of these groups and a need for many more, based on relationship, love, and care for all God's children. So this coalition, known as the Baltimore Interfaith Coalition for Dismantling Racism, invites you to hold and celebrate together with us at these particular events. Now, more than ever, especially our last two most recent instances of gun violence in our nation, it is very important that we come together to learn and to pray and hold close the knowledge of God's peace with us through each other and the love we display. We can help bring peace in the valley on the personal, communal, and institutional levels. So this is the first installment of our reflection and remembrance, as well as our rejuvenation of redemption and hope. And so I will now turn it over to Dr. Tatum, who will take it from here.
Thank you so much, Reverend McCall. I would like to lead us in prayer before we have our presenter come and talk to us about PS 103. So please join me in prayer. Creator God, we come to you this afternoon seeking peace in a time of violence, war, and great suffering. Many of us are weary, carrying the burdens of our families and our communities on our shoulders. Many of us are wondering how we move forward when tragedies seem to happen each and every day. In this moment, as we gather together in community, we pray that we find comfort and strength as we continue to work towards justice and peace. May the words spoken today ignite hope in us, reminding us that the vision of the beloved community cannot be overshadowed. May our eyes be open to see new possibilities and our ears open to hear the sound of change. Amen.
Okay, I guess I'm unmuting myself. So we're here, and Dr. Tatum, I'll need your help as you co-lead with this. We're here to have this wonderful presentation of former senior pastor of Union Baptist Church in West Baltimore, Reverend Dr. Alvin Hathaway, who's currently CEO and president of the Beloved Community Services Incorporated. And he has this really amazing a project that he's over along with other partnerships throughout Maryland in restoring PS 103. And so he's going to give us some of the history and the legacy of the restoration of that particular project. And he's going to share with you how we can all be a partnership in that particular vernacular. So I and Dr. Tatum will be asking him questions only, just out of housekeeping matters. If you're using Zoom, we just ask that you continue to just stay muted all the time. If you have questions or so forth, feel free to put those in the chat box, but we just don't want any particular disruption, so to speak, as we have this interview. And Carrie, could you make me co-host, please? Thank you very much. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Alvin Hathaway, as we also share some visualizations of what the particular project he's involved in. Thank you, Dr. Hathaway. We're so happy that you're here with us today.
Thank you, and it is my honor, it is my privilege. We have tabernacled together now for about 2 years, and we have many more miles to go before we sleep. I think it's important that we, within the faith community in Baltimore, always look for the oasis in the midst of a desert. Our responsibility is to lift up living waters. It is our responsibility to discover peace in the valley. I was blessed to have served at Union Baptist Church for the past 17 years. I served as senior pastor. And what is interesting to note is that where Union Baptist Church is located at 1219 Drew Hill Avenue, I actually lived my first 7 years of life at 1211 Drew Hill Avenue. So I grew up within the crucible and shadow of Union Baptist Church. I grew up in this historic West Baltimore community. I was born at Providence Hospital, which was located at the 1400 block of Division Street. So I walked through the alleys and the streets and the corners, knew the people and personalities that enriched this amazing West Baltimore historic district. And so I just want to introduce you to a property and a project, but it's more than just a property and a project. It is a community rediscovering its amenities and its assets and putting those assets and amenities into service. I believe that is the secret sauce to our city. How do we identify those hidden gems and then polish them up and make them shine so that our city indeed can shine? How do we make certain that within the neighborhoods and communities, there are services and support so that people who live there have opportunities for success because there are ladders that will lift them out of the conditions that they're in and elevate them to the positions that God will have them to be. And so that in essence is why we created back in 2008, the Beloved Community Services Corporation. It was just following the vision of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who challenged us all to be in search of the beloved community. Dr. Howard Thurman also challenged us in a philosophical way to be in search of the beloved community. But more importantly, the divine has always mandated us to be a people that was in search of the beloved community where we all are one and we all are in love and relationship with one another. So with that, I'd like just to introduce you to the project. I ask that you put on the screen the first slide, and that first slide is a picture of the building as we envision it to be. Public School 103 was built in 1877. It was a German-American school for its early years. Later in around 1905, 1906, it became an African-American at that time called colored school. But the significance of that school was that when it became a colored school, it was named after Reverend Henry Highland Garnett. Reverend Henry Highland Garnett was a preacher from the Eastern Shore. He was noted as one of the first people of his race to actually speak on the floor of Congress. He understood the need for freedom. So in the same vein of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and others, Reverend Henry Highland Garnett was a troubadour for freedom and justice, and his name has graced this building. PS 103 is located in 1300 block of Division Street in West Baltimore. Just to give you some proximity, Bethel AME Church is located in the 1300 block of Drew Hill Avenue, and this building sits just one block west of Bethel. Union Baptist Church is located in the 1200 block of Drew Hill Avenue, and this is just basically one block, to the west of that. Sharp Street is located on Edding Street, and this church is located one block just north of Edding Street. So it's there within the crucible of faith community. Bethel AME Church, Union Baptist Church, Sharp Street United Methodist Church, all strong anchors within this community. And this was the educational anchor. It was a school of excellence, well known throughout our city. Next slide, please. I asked this question, how are these landmarks, Maryland landmarks, related? Baltimore City College High School, Baltimore City Hall, the Lawyers Mall at the State House there in Annapolis, and the Howard P. Rawlins Drew Hill Conservatory in Drew Hill Park. They all are connected to PS 103 Henry Highland Garnet School because they were designed by the same architect and builder, George A. Frederick. You may not know his name, but he was a brilliant architect, a brilliant builder whose handprint on the landscape of our city and state is notable. He was a young man when he developed these designs. All of these designs were created before he was 30 years old. So it says something to us that we don't need to have our gestation period for our youth to be so long, that they have talents and gifts that can enrich our community, enrich our lives. And in the instance of George Frederick, these iconic buildings in our city and state, he renovated and designed and developed. But what was interesting is that when you look at all these other amazing, iconic buildings, the one building that has been vacant for over 20 years has been PS 103. It is not by happenstance that PS 103 is located in West Baltimore, historic West Baltimore. It is not by happenstance that when you see a large number of vacants and a large number of young people who do not have the educational outcomes of other areas, where the life expectancy is 20 years different from a person born in the area of Roland Park. You wonder, why is it that this is a community that is bereft of the kind of resources when at one time it was one of the historic, vibrant communities in our city? And so that means that maybe we look around and this is a desert. And then what does the faith community do when it finds itself in a desert? It seeks to create an oasis. It seeks to shine light in the midst of darkness. It seeks to find peace in the valley of despair. And so here we took on this landmark, this PS 103 project, with a goal and objective to make this the oasis in a community, to make this the catalytic investment that will transform this community. And I believe that we are moving in a way that God has ordained for us to go. Next slide, please. When we talk about the historic legacy of Old West Baltimore, not only is it historic in terms of places, but it's also historic in terms of people and personalities. People and personalities. Wow, how can there not be, when we think of this time, when we talk about voting rights, we talk about civil rights, and then in this community was the family of Clarence and Juanita Mitchell. Clarence Mitchell, who was seen as the 101st senator in Congress back in the day of the 60s and the 70s. Clarence Mitchell, who was the architect for the 1965 Voting Rights Act and the 1968 Housing Act. The gentleman who worked in a very insistent way representing the NAACP, that was his family home, was in this block. When you think about arts and entertainment, you must think about Cab Calloway. Cab Calloway has his roots in this community. But when you think about Jewish prudence and you think about the effectiveness of Jewish prudence, you must recognize that here was the birthplace of our own Thurgood Marshall, Justice Thurgood Marshall, a person who has written his handprint on our culture and our community and on our society. He and many others, the suffrage movement. I must admit that I must talk about the Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson, who lived in this community in the 1900 block of Druid Avenue, and his wonderful commitments and amazing commitments. Harry S. Cummings, who was the first African-American city council member, lived in this community. You can go on and on and on of the amazing luminaries that lived in this community that were involved in the suffrage movement, in the voting rights movement, in the civil rights movement. This historic legacy of Old West Baltimore is the largest African-American historic district in America. It's a story that needs to be told. Next slide. There are three personalities that within this project, we are going to lift their stories. Of course, Justice Thurgood Marshall, who was the first African-American to serve on the Supreme Court, who was one of the first African-American to be Solicitor General. Thurgood Marshall, who was the lead attorney for the NAACP and went all over this country, ensuring that there was rights. Thurgood Marshall, who was the architect for the Brown versus Board of Education decision that desegregated public schools. Thurgood Marshall, when you think about the amazing work where University of Maryland of Law School would not admit him, so he had to go to Howard University to go to law school. But then as soon as he got out of law school, one of the first cases that he took on was to sue the University of Maryland Law School so that an African-American could attend that school. Thurgood Marshall is an amazing luminary. And I make this argument. I say that Justice Thurgood Marshall should be to Baltimore City as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is to Atlanta. We should celebrate his contributions. He was the architect of many of the freedoms that we have this day. And then there was another gentleman that's from this community that's significant, and we're going to remember in this project. His name was Walter Sondheim. Walter Sondheim was a Jewish American who lived in Boynton Hill. Walter Sondheim was the architect of our downtown partnership and inter-harbor management. But he also was the chair of the Baltimore City School Board in 1954. So that when the decision came down, the Supreme Court decision came down, Brown versus Board, he, along with Theodore our mayor at that time, D'Alessandro, they moved to desegregate Baltimore City public schools, the first public school district south of the Mason-Dixon line to desegregate as a result of the 1954 decision. That was a bold move in that day. And that move allowed students to attend a Poly high school, Baltimore City High School, Western High School, and the other high schools that were desegregated as a result of that action that he took. And so Walter Sondheim is one that we want to remember, who was from this community, but we want to remember him as a part of this project. And then we had the amazing figure who was my childhood friend, and we all know as Congressman Elijah Cummings. Congressman Elijah Cummings, even in his latter years, recognized the importance and significance of PS 103. And he introduced legislation in May of 2019, which was the year in which we lost him. He introduced legislation to have PS 103 be studied so that it would become an asset of the National Park Service. He looked at the National Park Service and says, look at all the resources that are going to Fort McHenry, and look at all the resources that the spinoff economic development that has occurred there on Fort Avenue because of the economic investment that has been made in Fort McHenry. He says that there should be an African-American asset that receives similar benefit, and PS 103 is that asset that he placed to be studied as a part to have the federal government also see it as an asset and make investments in West Baltimore through that facility there in West Baltimore. So we want to recognize the work of Congressman Elijah Cummings. I was fortunate that his will and his last testament, he bequeathed to Beloved Community Services Corporation all of his campaign memorabilia. So all of his campaign memorabilia, his tapes, his VHSs, and all of that we have in store. And we're going to create within PS 103, we're going to recreate his campaign office so that people can walk through and hear his booming voice saying, "You are better than this," and hear his amazing statements, poems that you only have a minute, only 60 seconds in it. All of these amazing statements that he made, that our children are letters to the future that we may not see. And so these persons and other luminaries are going to be highlighted in this building. And I think it's important that we do remember the shoulders upon which we all stand. Next. You can flip this one quickly. Many people see me in my ministerial role, but they don't realize that I've always been in the development role, in development community. I'm working on a project on North Avenue that's seen at the top there at Hartford and North Avenue. That's going to be an amazing project. We're going to make a significant investment there. The lower project to the left is a joint venture with Conifer. That's a building that's under construction now on Wabash Avenue, right there at Cold Spring, where we're building a 160-some unit building there for seniors, and then a plan and proposal for the redevelopment of the low rises of McCullough Homes. So I've been embedded in this area of community economic development for a while. Next slide, please. There you get a snapshot of the Upton community, the Robert Marshall Park. You see highlighted Union Baptist Church, and then you see also the 1315 Division Street, which is where the Thurgood Marshall School is located. That gives you kind of a location in terms of where this building is, in terms of its significance within this community. Next slide, please. Here you see some of the an older picture of the school. When you think about PS 103, you have to not only recognize Justice Thurgood Marshall, who attended there, but also Clarence Mitchell Jr. I went to have a meeting with Kiefer Mitchell there in the governor's office, and he pointed me to a picture that was on his wall. On that picture was Justice Thurgood Marshall and President Lyndon Baines Johnson when Thurgood Marshall had been appointed city solicitor. He had his wife with him and his two children. J. Edgar Hoover was there. Roy Wilkins was there. And there was Clarence Mitchell Jr. And he said to me, he said, Reverend Al, I want you to know that both of those individuals, Clarence Mitchell Jr. and Thurgood Marshall, all graduated from PS 103. PS 103 has an amazing legacy of students that have gone on to do some amazing things. Persons whose names, if I were to mention them, you would know even to this day, all find that their educational academic careers began at this school. 8 classrooms, everyone in that classrooms, schools of excellence. They would use the front street of Division Street as their playground. This school and community was one, and everyone worked to ensure that the students that attended got a high quality education. And as I said, have gone on to do some amazing things. Next slide. Well, as any old building, it has suffered disrepair. And so you see current conditions, it's boarded now. In 2016, there was a fire that destroyed much of the second level. Fortunately, there was an insurance policy that allowed for that area and roof to be put on. But this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna tackle this building. And once again, in a desert, we're gonna make it an oasis. In a valley, we're gonna find peace. Next slide, please. There you have that envisioned the Henry Highland Garnett School, PS 103. We're going to keep that name, but added to this building will be the name of Justice Thurgood Marshall. It will be known as the Justice Thurgood Marshall Amenity Center. And there's a reason why we call it an amenity center. When you think of an amenity center, you think of that which adds value. And we're going to talk about what value we will add to this community. Next slide, please. There's a large footprint that this project takes on. It takes on all that is highlighted in that red. And so there'll be the building and its renovation, its green space and so forth. It's going to be a gold LEED, a net zero building. And then there are parking spaces that are provided on Edding Street. That's a part of our footprint as well. It's a significant investment in this community, but it's one that this community deserves. Next slide. If you talk about this building, you will have on the first level, you have basically 4 classrooms. There were always 4 classrooms. There's a long hallway that extends from the front to the rear of the church, of the school, and then off of each of those 8 classrooms. Those 8 classrooms will have different purposes. We will have an employment center. We'll have a education and ethics center. The National Park Service will have a center located there. We will take one of the classrooms and we will restore it in its historic condition so that people can go in and see in a very real sense the tin ceilings, the blackboards, the chalkboards, the wooden slats that made up the desks that were of that era. All of those amenities that were of that era, we're going to restore one of the classrooms back to that condition. Next slide. This is the lower level. The lower level will be an area where we will have archival materials, we'll have different other activities that will go on in the lower level. This kind of shows that building as well. All 3 floors we will use to their fullest capacity. Next slide, please. This is what's exciting is that on the top level, we're going to have an assembly room. And that assembly room is going to be a multi-purpose room. It's going to be a room where there will be a large screen so that we can have presentations, multimedia presentations. It'll be places where a person could come and have a small banquet. A person could come and have their wedding ceremony. It's going to be an amazing place. And then we'll have a room for a conference room. And we're also going to have space for the alumni. The alumni of PS 103 are signing on. They want to come back to the community that birthed them and provide services and their support to this community. And we're going to provide space for them to do that. Next slide, please. This kind of gives you a glimpse of that. Because this is proposed to be an asset of the National Park Service, we anticipate that this is going to be a major tourist attraction in Baltimore City. So we are preparing the surrounding community for what will be an influx of persons that will come and rediscover that which we have already known, is that our community is a community of value and a community of historic legacy. And this kind of gives you a glimpse of that. Next slide, please. This is a glimpse of the what I have proposed for the top floor, where it would be in an open space. It's going to be gold LEED. It's going to be a quality renovation. In fact, we are spending over $12 million in this building, in this project. It's a project of about 18,000 square feet. And so it's going to be a first-class building, one in which everybody in this community and all of us can be proud of, that this is the kind of amenity and asset that we'll have in our community. Next slide. I mentioned the hallway. This is that grand hallway. Back in the day, it's an amazing architectural feat. From floor to ceiling, there's a glass windows that run the whole hallway, where you have glass inside the hallway, where this glass, you can't see it here, but the glass would slide up so that when they slid the windows up, the air from the outside will come through the classroom, through the underneath of the windows, go in the hallway. And that was their air condition back of that day. These windows are going to be all exposed. The doors that are historic doors were all going to be replaced. In this hallway, this amazing hallway, where we can imagine the feet that walked up and down this hallway, this again will be restored to a condition that will show the illustrious beauty of this building and the architectural brilliance that George Fredericks had. Next slide, please. Again, this is the that area of the major room there that I had displayed to you, that will be multi-purpose and fashion. This shows that again. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the building, and I'm showing the rear of the building because the rear, because of ADA, is going to be a main point of access for people to go into this building. So we're going to have attention not only to the development of the front of the building, we're going to have attention also to the rear of the building, so that the rear is aesthetically pleasing, just as we will have the front. And I think that's going to be an amazing asset to the church, to this community. There you see the parking lot. In that parking lot, we're going to have two EV stations, electrical vehicle charging stations, because we know in the future there's going to be more electric vehicles, and they need to have places where they can also refuel as well. Next slide, please. I think one of the strengths of our project is that we're going to carry out the passion and the theme of Justice Thurgood Marshall. Justice Marshall once said, "The measure of a country's greatness is its ability to retain compassion in times of crisis." And so we're going to have what's known as the Judge Alexander Williams Center for Education, Justice, and Ethics. Is going to be the primary tenant in this building. Judge Alexander Williams is a retired federal judge, had been the state's attorney for Prince George's County, and is an amazing scholar in his own right. And he's committed to developing the next generation of legal minds. He's committed to providing persons who need legal assistance. He's committed to ethical training, so that persons in the public arena can have places where they can learn and get certified in the ethics of how you have civic engagement. We know that's important now. He spearheaded legislation in the House and the Senate of Maryland, where judges now have ethical training. And our goal is that we will spearhead similar types of legislation in Baltimore City, so that Baltimore City officials and others in the nonprofit and corporate communities can make certain that they have a ethical measuring rod as they do business in our city on the behalf of people. So this is going to be a dynamic center. The Center for Education, Justice, and Ethics is currently located now at University of Maryland College Park. but it's going to have its principal office is going to be housed in PS 103 here in West Baltimore. And we're going to continue the legacy of Justice Thurgood Marshall, who was a legal scholar and a legal warrior on behalf of all of his people. Next slide, please. I think one of the things we need to realize is that we're going to be mission driven and solutions oriented, meaning that you identify a problem, but you also got to present a solution. So we're going to have educators and researchers all involved in the dynamic in this community. It's called action research, where you look at a context and you develop solutions to the problems in that context. We have a gentleman, Dr. Jonathan Richardson. He heads up a program on violence. He heads up a program at the shock trauma, where if a person gets shot, they go there and they get services, and they're wraparound services. His office is going to be located here. We're going to do a concentrated study in West Baltimore on gun violence and gun violence solutions. We're going to be mission driven and solution oriented in terms of the work that we will do. Next slide, please. This kind of gives a kind of a view about what we call our civic initiative, where we look at restorative justice, where we look at youth employment. It is all research-based, all evidence-based actions and programs that we will undertake that will all be done within this program project. Continue, please. This continues. One of the things that we recognize is that mind mapping is very important. How you think is how you act. And so we'll have the kind of research around that area. We're going to work very intentionally around a cultural change, around thinking and solution and reflection and action. All of those things are going to be embedded in the work that we do within this facility. Next slide, please. Again, Justice Thurgood Marshall, who outlined for us how we began to have a civil society that's based on justice. If you want to make change, you got to be involved in it. And he has these amazing sayings that we will have incorporated throughout this property and throughout this building. Next slide, please. That's the Justice Thurgood. That's the Judge Alexander Williams Center. That's our anchor tenant that will be in there. There's going to be other tenants. We're going to have programs by the Maryland Aviation Administration. We're going to launch a program called Project Takeoff. Project Takeoff is with Baltimore Washington International Airport, Thurgood Marshall Airport, where we introduce people to youth and others to the field of aviation, airport management, hospitality. That's going to be an ongoing program in this. We're going to have University of Maryland, Baltimore has a mini medical school, and we'll have people there learning the protocols, the language, and treatments related to as if they were actually going to med school. We're going to have the Johns Hopkins University has the Billie Holiday Liberation Arts program. That's going to be housed here as well, where we will also teach a cultural activity and have cultural presentations as a part of the work that we'll do within this facility. Next slide, please. We have a whole host of partners, all well known without this community. They range from the local community there, the Upton Planning Committee, all the way to U.S. Bank, the 5th largest bank in America. Technical skills, assets, we've all brought this amazing team together, Baltimore City government, as well as Department of Housing, Community Development, and the National Park Service as well. It's an amazing team that's involved in bringing this project to fruition. Next slide, please. And at this time when we did this, it was an $8 million budget. That budget has gone up to $12 million now. But God has blessed us. We have secured the funding for the project. We're going through closing now. And on July the 2nd, at 11 o'clock, from 11 to 12 p.m., we will break ground and begin construction on the Justice Thurgood Marshall Amenity Center at PS 103. Next slide. You know, in the city, in the community in which I was born, you kind of come to a point, Bishop Madden would understand this. What's going to be your legacy? What did you do? And my prayer is that I've been able to serve in such a way that we could create institutions that future generations will be beneficiaries of. So that's me kind of looking into a future that I may not see from a community in which I was born, and being thankful that God has allowed me the opportunity to bring this project to fruition. Final slide, I believe. If you were high corporate givers, I'll be talking to you about naming rights, where you could have your name on the building for $1 million. If you wanted to have the plaza named after you, you can contribute $750,000. This is just the naming rights that will occur. And quite honestly, there are many persons that have already named, have naming rights on many of the classrooms and facilities there. So I'll not have a direct ask of you on this call, but I want you to know that there are many people that are investing in this community, and we can close it out right there.
Well, Dr. Hathaway, thank you for that extremely amazing presentation of the PS 103. I am truly excited how this will truly be a multi-dimensional place to really sow a seed in a huge way, and its intentionality with space, where you're going to do it, and just this entire setting. It looks like it's more than just having programs, but it's about our young people really getting this really holistic experience in just this amazing place. And the fact that it is returning to a place where it has harvest history with many of the leaders. And so, Dr. Hathaway, we truly, truly appreciate that. And thank you all for that. And thank you, Dr. Tatum. We want to do something a little bit unique because it's about 16 of us here on Zoom, and we'll probably unspot ourselves, but we want to open it up for questions and answers. And so, being that it's a small gathering, we'll be happy to have you all to unmute yourself. Just a few little housekeeping rules before we go very crazy about it. We just ask that there's this really cool thing in your Zoom called reactions. We just simply ask, just for helpfulness, if you could just simply hit your raise hand button. If you hit your raise hand button, that will help I and Dr. Tatum could kind of figure out in order who's what. Once we call on you, either I or Dr. Tatum, we'll call on you, and we just ask if you just state your name, what organization you're from, and just feel free to make whatever question or statement you'd like to make to Dr. Hathaway. Hope that's all pretty clear. So let's try this out and see what happens. So, and thank you, Carrie, for helping with all the displays today. We greatly appreciate it. So feel free to use that reaction button to raise your hand and see if there's any questions or comments.
Reverend McCall, I'll start us off with a question. First of all, Dr. Hathaway, thank you so much for your presentation. And I really appreciated the history that you gave us, particularly around West Baltimore. Being new to the city, it's always good to kind of see the layout and the formation of this city. And so I would love for you to reflect on this question. You know, given that we are trying to dismantle racism institutionally within Baltimore, why is this history so important that we preserve it and also share it? Why do you think we need to make sure that we're preserving this history moving forward, and how that relates to us, you know, making steps towards dismantling racism?
Well, I think it's for a number of reasons. One, you know, structural racism is not new. It is embedded into the very fabric of our system. But we've had opportunities, particularly here in Baltimore, where we've been able to resist it. We've been able to overcome it. And if you look very closely at the history of West Baltimore and many of its personalities, you saw that they were very intentional around making change for the benefit and betterment of others. As I mentioned, Justice Thurgood Marshall, just think about that. He was the architect of much of the civil rights legislation and laws that are our freedoms that we observe today. I go back in history to Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson. Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson, he tackled the whole very issue of Negroes as chattel, which was Plessy versus Ferguson. He challenged that way back in 1883. In 1883, he said, wait a minute, let's look at African Americans traveling along the interstate. And he took a case of families going from Norfolk to Baltimore City that had purchased a first-class ticket, but was trying to be restricted to below standard accommodations. And he sued. And he won that case. That case went to federal court. And at that court, in the Sioux steamship case, they said that Negroes are not chattel in interstate commerce. That was monumental. It's monumental to the point that when Thurgood Marshall had Brown versus Board of Education, he cited that 1883 case in his Brown versus Board of Education decision. So when you look closely at the people and personalities of West Baltimore, you begin to see that the attack, you begin to see that how we address the issues of systemic racism has been embedded in the people and personalities of this community over time. Restrictive covenants. Restrictive covenants was born in 1911 in Baltimore City, where you had a family moving into the 1300 block of McCullough Street, and they fought against it, and they were able, with the later decisions, to move back restrictive covenants. So I think Baltimore tells a story, and we have kind of given over to Atlanta as if that's the place of the civil rights movement. But I would argue that the civil rights movement has its genesis in Baltimore, and much of it occurred as its genesis in West Baltimore, the largest historic African-American district in the country. And we don't know that. We don't celebrate that. We don't see it as a tourist attraction. We don't see it as the economic stimulus that it should be. Our goal is that this PS 103 project will ignite that kind of understanding in our community and ignite that kind of investment back into our community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. So if you could just, if you don't mind, we do ask that you use the reaction or raise your hand, but we do want to, there's Bishop Sutton who'd like to speak. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, yes. Well, again, every time Dr. Hathaway speaks, I want to be a better person, a better Christian and all that. I could just listen to you all day, and I'm sure your old members thought they were sometimes. But thank you so much for that. And I'm struck by the fact that you are a spiritual religious leader, and that you hold your faith and your truths to be so very important. It's so obvious that it's a guiding light in your life. And it's also obvious that your spirituality brings you closer to everyone else of whatever faith or no faith. And it leads you to do more work of reconciliation and justice in the world. So that's really the comment that I wanted to make. Of course, if someone asks, why is a religious leader doing this, and why is a church all involved in that? Well, you're doing it because you love, and you love your Lord. And I just think this project is a concrete example, and I mean concrete in every sense of the word. It's a concrete example of the power of spirituality in the world. So thank you.
Oh, God bless you. And I think, you must also, I think one of the amazing things about your faith community is that you have a feast day that's named for Thurgood Marshall. And I think that's important as well.
Yes, in fact, I preached on the feast day, May 17th, a few weeks ago on his life. Yeah, it's a feast day. He's in our Book of Saints. And of course, people wonder, we have so very few examples of lay people who are not clergy in saints' days. And usually they are people who are so identified with their faith and so identified ostensibly with the work of God, that it's very, very few opportunities do we have to just honor people who weren't known for their church work, but they were known for their world work. And I made a case for how that very flawed man, and I'm sure Dr. Hathaway, about some of the stories.
Yes, sir.
He was an Episcopalian. He was associated with 3 of our Episcopal churches, and let's just say he was known.
Yes, that's right.
He was not, and so he wasn't a perfect man, but he's honored because obviously he put his faith to work for justice. And so again, I'm so proud of that, Senator, and the fact that you are honoring him as well.
Thank you. Lisa Ciliano, please unmute yourself.
We'll see if I can control this technology. Dr. Hathaway, it's really an amazing project to see. I lived in Baltimore and lived there 11 years and didn't know that history. So now that I'm in Southern Maryland, Calvert County, some of the same issues face us down here where the history is there and our African American population is perfectly aware of it and trying to bring that to the front. How can we at a distance help support the PS 103 project?
I think we have Justice Thurgood Marshall, which is .org, which is our website. But I think what's important is what we're attempting to do with our CDC, the Love Community Services Corporation. We see it as a vehicle to go into communities throughout our state and country and bring back into service historic African American facilities. We've been called in Cambridge, Maryland right now to work there around the restoration of some significant historic African American facilities. And I know in Southern Maryland, when you had that influx of African Americans, largely to the Roman Catholic Church, they all populated there, that there are those kind of similar facilities. And our hope is that we can use our understanding of development, use our understanding of financing, use our understanding of programming to begin to put some of those facilities back into service in our modern time. I think a building that's operative can tell a story in a very powerful way. And that is one of our goals. Right now, we not only we're doing PS 103, we're restoring the home of Clarence and Juanita Mitchell. That's there at 1324 Drill Avenue. I have pictures of Mary McLeod Bethune standing on the steps of 1324. I have pictures of Eleanor Roosevelt on the steps. I have pictures of Rosa Parks providing nursing services to Juanita Mitchell there in her bedroom, there in that home. So how do we tell these stories when people go by, if they're vacant or abandoned? But if we bring them back to life, bring them back and tell the stories, then people begin to realize that they're walking in very treasured land. And I think Southern Maryland has similar stories that we can resurrect as well.
Thank you. And just a little minor protocol. Lisa Ciliano, could you tell us what context you're from and what parish, and just to circle back so everybody knows.
Lisa Siciliano. I am an Episcopal deacon in the southern region of the Diocese of Maryland. So that is Calvert County and southern Anne Arundel County.
Great. And our previous comment, for the couple of you that may not know, that is our bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. So just want to make sure we got context. Joanne Bowen, please unmute yourself.
Yes, this question is for Dr. Hathaway. You said that you were breaking ground July 2nd.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, when is your projected completion time for the project?
Let me give you some of our benchmarks. So last July 2nd, we had introduced in the legislature a recognition of Thurgood Marshall's birthday. His birthday is actually July the 2nd. So last year we stood at that same place and we had the governor recognize this is Maryland Day as the Thurgood Marshall Day. We had Baltimore City, the mayor, recognize it. We come back this year and we have groundbreaking. That's July the 2nd. That's the 114th birthday of Justice Thurgood Marshall. And in 2023, on his birthday, once again, we're going to have ribbon cutting, where we actually will enter the building and the building will be completed and be put into service. So we're using July the 2nd, which is the birthday of Justice Thurgood Marshall, as kind of like the stones in the road of what we remember about him. And we're using that. We're calling it Freedom Weekend because July the 2nd is not only his birthday, but it was the day that the Declaration of Independence was signed and we celebrate July the 4th as Independence Day.
So that would, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So that would be 1 year?
1 year from this day, yeah, July.
To complete the project.
Well,
So
we'll complete it before then, but we're going to cut the ribbon in a formal way on July the 2nd, 2023.
It also appears that you will have quite a bit of staff to hire too for such a project.
It's going to be a job. It's going to be a job creator. Yes, indeed.
Very good.
Thank you for that comment. And Joanne, before you go, could you tell us, is there a church you go to? Just so we know just where you're from. It's just...
Yes, I'm so proud to be a member of the Church of the Holy Trinity, Baltimore, Maryland, with Father McCall as my rector, and we're happy for the next 30 days.
Yeah, hold on to them. Hold on to them.
All right.
Did you make an announcement, Ramel?
I have not, but Bishop Dennis Madden, if you could unmute, then I'll go at the end.
Reverend Al, that was just overwhelming, that presentation. It was just magnificent.
Bishop, before you ask your question, tell us where you work.
Okay, I'm one of the auxiliary bishops here in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Thank you, thanks. And it is such a, it is like a gem, but it's like a beacon, and energy and blessings and graces will come out from this building and from all the projects that are going into it. And I thought, following what Bishop Sutton was mentioning before, it's that spiritual quality that you carry with you. And that's what's going to spread. And I was thinking about our city. We get involved in the violence. We say, "Oh, we got to deal with the gun issue, and we got to get more police. We got to do it." And those are they're important. But what you're doing is what's really going to bring peace to the city. It's the spiritual quality, and this project that you have is going to bring to life what Elijah said about you're better than that. That will speak to the city, and it's just wonderful. It's more than a historical project. It's a living project, and it will give life to the city. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Bishop Madden. You're on my invitation list.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bishop, and thank you. Any other comments and so forth? Any other comments? Yes. Matthew Taylor, before you go, just tell us where you work. Thank you.
I'm Matt Taylor. I'm the Protestant scholar at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. And Al, that was a beautiful presentation. I'm so excited about this project. You had mentioned the National Park Service and the connections with Fort McHenry and this being kind of another outpost of the National Park Service. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about that process and where we stand in that process right now, and kind of what you anticipate.
Yes. So as I mentioned, back in 2019, May, Congressman Elijah Cummings introduced federal legislation that passed that will put Project PS 103 in what they call a study period, where they will study its historic significance. They looked at it in totality. They had community meetings. They've done all that. Then they went through a important period where they're now writing their report. And their report is due to come out later this month. And by all indications, that report is going to be favorable. What that then means is that Congressman Mfume, who both of his parents attended PS 103, is prepared to introduce legislation that will then have it become a part of the National Park Service. I've already talked to Superintendent Moore at the National Park Service and many people within that, all the way up to the Secretary of Interior, as well as the Director of the National Park Service. They are prepared to make this a part of the National Park Service, so that what will happen is that you'll have park rangers that will actually be housed in the building, and they'll be doing interpretive, historic interpretations of the community, as well as of that property and the surrounding areas. That's going to be very significant to actually have federal employees vis-a-vis the Park Service, park rangers actually embedded in this community.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. I have one other question and obviously a statement to make, but any other questions from the floor or so forth? Anyone else? Brent, I guess that's your physical. Oh, no, I see Melvin Tatum. Yes, Melvin Tatum. Yes, unmute yourself. And tell us what you represent, or, if you go somewhere, or all that.
Well, my name is Melvin Tatum. I happen to be the father of Alicia Michelle Tatum, and I'm from Edenton, North Carolina. My daughter was telling me that you have roots here in Edenton, North Carolina.
Deep roots. Deep roots in Edenton, North Carolina. We're probably cousins if you're from Edenton, North Carolina.
I'm not from Edenton, but I'm living here now. And the presentation was very interesting because we have some buildings here I'm quite sure you know about, and to see what's going on in Baltimore, because as I visit my daughter, I'm wondering, can anything good come out of Baltimore? And to see this presentation today, PS 103, that is a blessing to other communities all over, because that's what's needed. Is so much history that you brought out in the presentation. It just sticks with me. So I'll be letting people know, because we have a couple of buildings that people are trying to work on, but it's a slow process. And to see how you're moving along is very interesting.
Edenton is on my radar. That's coming back home. Both my mother and my father were born in Edenton, North Carolina. So my father is of the Hathaway surname, and then my mother's the Beasley surname. And so many of the people in Edenton are related to me either on my paternal side or my maternal side. Edenton is significant because the Hathaway family comes from the Somerset Plantation. And so that Somerset Plantation is where our family roots from West Africa came. And so Dorothy Sullivan was my cousin, was the curator of the Somerset Plantation. And every 2 years we have our Somerset Plantation reunion. So when you think about, so for me, when I think in terms of my historical context, the Blounts, the Little Johns, they're all my relatives and all a part of my family because of my rootage there in Edenton, North Carolina. I commend you. You're in God's country.
Well, thank you. Well, let me know when that reunion comes again. I'll make sure that I'll be there.
I sure will.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tatum. I'm glad we see the correlation and the relation. Thank you, Dr. Tatum. Well, I think this is a good time, and I thank you all so much for being a part of this here. But as this Baltimore Coalition continues to go forth, keep doing this very important thing. Keep telling the history that's not written in books. Keep telling the history that in many cases can easily be forgotten. Keep telling the inconvenient history, because one of the reasons why we have had these symposiums is to talk a history that in many cases you do not always get publicized. It does not always get full media attention because it's inconvenient. It shows the ills that we have to live up to. If our communities were more realized and more developed, we'd be in a much different space. So it's up to each of us to be a part of that team. And so it has been my gracious honor, along with all of my other colleagues, to continue to give you opportunities to help dismantle racism, particularly in the context of Baltimore and wherever that you are in your particular community. Please know that you can do this. You don't have to be like anyone else. You could be just little old you to do such a gracious thing. If you would, let me end you all with a sending prayer. Gracious Spirit, we thank you. We thank you. We thank you for this wonderful presentation by Reverend Dr. Alvin Hathaway. We thank you for all of the questions that was answered. And we ask that you'll continue to encourage each of us in our given context to do that gracious work called ministry, to do that gracious work called dismantling racism, to do that gracious work called advocacy in whatever context that we may be. It's not about all of us being in one faith or this faith. It's about all of us being together for one common thing, which is dismantle an ill called racism. And so bless us as we get ready for our next installment, which will be happening at 6 p.m. at the Baltimore Hebrew Congregation. as we continue to lift up even more leaders in our local context, to know how we work to help desegregate some things in the past. We also pray that you'll bless us to lift up those voices and that we can continue to tell the inconvenient stories so that way our local context can be fully realized and we can be a better people. It's in your gracious name of whatever that we believe in, we say, amen.